Okay, so here's our agenda. Want to quickly cover what HEVC is and what the main encoding parameters are, look at the royalty status, cover the qualitative issue, see where we are from an encode and decode status, look at where it is on the market for both OTT and streaming, and that's where we'll conclude. How usable is it? We're also going to look at some survey results. Anybody see the survey on the main streaming media site? We put a survey up about a month ago. Where is HEVC? When are you going to start using it? Why are you going to start using it? And we're going to look at some of the results from that. I'm writing an article about HEVC adoption in the next couple of weeks, and that survey was designed to help with that article. So just a couple of real quick slides on HEVC. I'm sure you've heard or know most of this stuff. HEVC is the successor to H.264. It's approved by the same two standards bodies that approved H.264. And in January 13, it received first stage approval, which basically meant, we've got a spec, let's start selling. So that's why the start of last year was a lot of noise about HEVC. The key benefits of HEVC, there's two major benefits. One is the ability to produce the same quality as H.264 at between 35 and 50%, or 35 to 50% data rate reduction. That can save you money on bandwidth. It can allow you to send HD through smaller pipes. If you've got a fixed connection to a cellular device, limited to SD now, maybe you can compress enough with HEVC to go HD. And then if you've got fixed existing pipes, you're a cable company or a company like that, you can send more videos through existing distribution bandwidth. So that's the same quality as H.264. These are all the benefits, and then also enables Ultra HD videos. If you want to go to 4K, 2K, 8K, HEVC is a codec for you. And if you want to dive deeper into the technology, there are links at the end of the article. I just wanted to, everybody knows how to encode H.264 at this point. I wanted to point out that like H.264, HEVC has multiple profiles. So when you encode HEVC, you will choose a profile. That should be pretty familiar to anybody who has worked with H.264. Unlike H.264, however, there are major differences between the main and the main 10 profile. And we're going to cover this when we talk about UHD TV sets. A lot of early UHD TV sets only use the main profile, and a lot of the producers moved to main 10 to get the 10-bit operation. So there are some UHD sets out there that may have main HEVC decoders that won't play back content encoded with main 10. Very big difference between this and this. You really didn't have that with main, baseline, and high on the H.264 standpoint. But we'll cover that in a little bit more detail later. If you want to know the major differences between MPEG-2, H.264, and HEVC, Elemental has a pretty nice white paper that covers that, and they basically talk about the different modes of operation for intra-prediction, coded image types, transform, all the categories there. So if somebody asks you what are the major differences between the three compression technologies, this is a nice reference you can have to talk about that. Okay, so the royalty status. What do we know about MPEG? What do we know about HEVC royalties? There's the MPEG LA patent group was the same patent administration group that put together the patent groups for MPEG-2, for H.264. I want to say in the March timeframe, maybe, they said, we don't know what the final royalty policy is, but this is what we're thinking. And they talked about a 20-cent per encoder, decoder royalty. It kicks in after you've shipped 100,000 units, so there's a de minimis exception. The maximum first-year royalty will be $25 million. Now, in comparison, the maximum royalty for H.264 this year is $6.5 million. So if you're Adobe, for example, you're paying $6.5 million a year to MPEG LA to include H.264 in the Adobe Flash Player and all the encoding tools and all the other decode tools that support it. If you decide to include HEVC, it's another 25 million, assuming you hit the maximum, and they would if they included it in Flash Player, because they would ship, I think it's 125 million units, which gets you to the maximum, or something like that, 5 times 20 to get to. So they're one of the few companies that would actually hit the maximum. You know, obviously Microsoft will, Google will, Apple will if they decide to ship as well. So it's 25 million instead of 5, which is the first year of the H.264 royalty, and it's in addition to, not instead of. It's a lot of money. And we'll look at the implication of that on free HEVC decode as we get to the latter part of the presentation. So MPEG-LA has a patent group. It's got a bunch of stakeholders in the HEVC development process, but there are many prominent IP owners, including Microsoft, Panasonic, Dolby, and Samsung, who are not in the MPEG-LA group. So it's very possible that if you want to use HEVC, you're going to write a check out to the MPEG-LA patent group if you are an encoder-decoder user, right? So there is no royalty on content. It's just for encode-decode. So if you were, again, Adobe, you say we want to include HEVC and Flash, you write a check to MPEG-LA, and then there are other companies that may have HEVC patent rights that you may have to write a check to as well. How much do they want? We don't know. So there's a lot of uncertainty here, even though this is relatively fleshed out. And the patent group here has made it clear that they don't want content-related royalties, one of the major differences between H.264 and HEVC. But we don't know what these IP owners will do. Maybe they will want royalties on content, maybe they won't. H.264, if you were distributing pay-per-view video or subscription video, once you get above certain minimums, there is a royalty on H.264 encoded video distributed for pay-per-view or subscription. So major difference between the two technologies. Okay, so what are the implications of the HEVC royalty? Very few companies will reach the 100,000 unit minimum. So if you're in Vivio or TEM or Thomson or Sorensen or Elemental or Digital Rapids, you don't ship 100,000 encoders. So you'll never pay a royalty on HEVC, just like you've never paid a royalty on H.264 because similar de minimis exceptions existed. If you're a hardware decoder, you're making a chip for an OTT box or for a mobile device, you're going to sell more than 100,000, but you're going to just include the royalty in your unit cost. You're just going to gross it up by 20 cents or so. That's really not going to hinder anybody from implementing HEVC decode. Really where it's going to have the most impact is going to be on the software decoder side, because Adobe can't offset revenue for the free Flash player, but it's going to have to spend 20 cents a unit. So what Adobe has announced, and it kind of hit me 2 or 3 months ago. I was reading in The Economist about how Adobe's income was affected by moving to the subscription base. So their quarterly net income used to be in the 200 million range, and then it's now dropped to like 49 million in the last reported quarter. And then I came back to the HEVC and saw it's 25 million, and I realized that any quarter Adobe adopts HEVC decode for free in Flash will cut their net revenue by 50%. So they're a public company. It's never going to happen. So I think it's going to be a long time before we see free HEVC decode in a ubiquitous sense. It could be in Internet Explorer soon. It could be in Google soon, but that's only a piece of the puzzle. That doesn't give you, it doesn't give you Android, doesn't give you iOS, doesn't give you Firefox, doesn't give you Opera, doesn't give you Safari. So the nice thing about Flash is if Adobe said we want HEVC decode in Flash, you've got 98% of computers in 3 months. And that's what happened with H.264. I don't see it happening with HEVC because 25 million is just too big a pill to swallow. I think this is going to happen. I think this is going to happen. I think this is going to happen. but even that doesn't clear up the situation because HTML5 is still unusable until Dash becomes universally supported. And that's 12 to 24 months away as it is. Okay, so what about quality? Here's what the vendors are saying. This is Telestream. Whole bunch of numbers up here. Basically, in a sports profile, high motion, they're saying that HEVC or H.265 is same quality at 28% lower data rate. Okay, so it's not 50, it's 28%. 28% is still, I mean, if you're paying for bandwidth, the 28% is, it's a nice chunk. I mean, I'm not, and if it's, this was an MPEG-2 profile, this is an H.264 profile against sports, it's around 27.8. So Telestream is basically saying, 30% reduction in data rate, same quality. If you spoke to Harmonic, they were saying same quality at about 45% data rate reduction. Elemental is same quality at 40% data rate reduction. But it's a moving target. They both say it's a moving target because HEVC quality is improving rapidly. We'll look at some examples of that in a second. But really what's most interesting is what's the optimal, are people willing to wait 20 times longer for HEVC as they were for H.264? So they're trying to tune their encoding parameters to deliver acceptable quality within an acceptable encoding time. And we'll look at some of the survey results about what producers thought was an acceptable encoding time.
I was at a presentation last week with a different encoder vendor, not mentioned here, and they said that these types of figures are based on using the least complex encoder of H.264 against the current best H.265, and not the best current H.264 against the best current H.265. And if you do the best of H.264 currently, those numbers actually come down a lot more to the kind of 10% range. In the future, they'll go up to these numbers, but the best H.264 at the moment isn't 40% better than the best H.265. Is that something you would disagree with?
Who said that?
Different encoder vendor.
Different encoder vendor.
Yeah.
Okay, well, what I did, I don't know if you were here when we came in, but what I did and what's available on my website is I asked for my two sample test files, one is 720p, one is 1080p, I went to Zencoder, a cloud vendor, because I was doing some cloud vendor trials, and I did their highest quality H.264 encode. For 720p, I did 2.9 megabits per second, and then I asked Elemental and Telestream to send me the best quality HEVC at 1.45 and 1.45. So you can look at these yourself and draw your own comparisons. At 1080p, I did 6 megabits per second and 2.9 and 2.9. So this is the best H.264 I know how to do. And this is the best HEVC these companies can produce. So I take your point, but that's why I ran the test. And actually, there's kind of the really interesting point happened at Streaming Media East. I don't know how many people saw this on the Streaming Media website, but a gentleman, David Ronca from Netflix, basically said what you said, and he said, we've looked at many HEVC encoders, and at 1080p and under, we see no quality benefit as compared to X.264. So one of the reasons I did the survey that I talked about to get the average data rate to understand how my readers were encoding was so I could run the test myself. And it's a very interesting observation. I mean, at Netflix, you tend to trust things that Netflix and YouTube and Hulu say about encoding tools and codecs because they're huge users. And this was a very startling statement. It kind of came out quiet in a session like this, and it was pretty significant. So I provided my own files. Maybe Netflix does a much better job with X.264 than Zencoder does, but I didn't see anything like this. I mean, I saw, we'll look at a slide here's my experience with the first generation of HEVC encode. Still frame comparisons were very, very close, but if you played the video, you saw a lot of mosquitoes around hard edges along soft backgrounds. So if you did a frame-by-frame comparison, like the PSNR and SSIM comparisons, they would look very close, but if you played the video, massive mosquitoes twittering about the hard edges in the video, much more so in HEVC than you saw in H.264. And I saw this, if you look at my test clips that you download from the website, this particular frame is 41 seconds in. Look at that with HEVC, look at that with H.264. You're not going to see that big a difference with the new clips. You did see a very big difference with the clips that I tested first generation. And then same deal here, another very hard edges, very soft background, and you could just see the mosquitoes following this hard edge as she danced across the stage. So the still frame quality was very good at half the data rate, but the motion quality was noticeably worse. And then same thing here in the 1080p test clip, and this is 146 in. So this is what I looked for when I got the clips back from Elemental and Telestream. How did these particular frames look? And they look very good. The mosquitoes were pretty much gone. So I think it's not going to be, every HEVC encoder is going to be different. Don't look at still frame comparisons. Don't trust SSIM or PSNR. Look at the motion video yourself and look for artifacts like this. Okay, and again, this is a bit.ly link to the website. If you want to download the files and look at it yourself, you have those resources. And this is the promised frame. HEVC at 1.45 megabits per second, H.264 at 2.9 megabits per second, and this frame is actually a touch sharper. And again, there were no mosquito artifacts, trailing the dancer. So I didn't exhaustively study it, but the bottom line for me is HEVC is a better codec. It's evolving quickly, but don't look at PSNR because they're still frame only. The big difference I saw was during moving playback. Okay, so the second question for me is, where is it going to play? We'll cover the software player, how you play it, but how powerful a computer do you need to play back HEVC? And what I did here was I played back 720p in H.264 and HEVC, and then I played back 1080p in H.264 and HEVC on some fairly older computers in my office. So this is like the first Core 2 Duo I ever tested. I think it's from 2004, 2005, pretty older computer. This is a 2009 Core 2 Duo MacBook Pro, and this is about a 2-year-old 8-core computer, pretty stout, but still, not an exceptional computer. It's 3 years old at this point. And 720p HEVC played fine on all these computers, but it didn't play well on the Mac or on the initial Core 2 Duo in 1080p. 1080p H.264 played fine. So if I'm producing HEVC and I want general purpose playback on computers and notebooks with good playback CPU, then I'm going to stick to 720p and not do 1080p, which I think is fine. I don't think 1080p I think is overrated at this point. The big question for a lot of producers is where is HEVC going to play on the mobile side? This is Frost & Sullivan's global HEVC capable device shipments, and the numbers get pretty big, but none of these units, or very few of these units, have hardware-specific HEVC decode. So if you don't have HEVC decode in hardware, what suffers? Anybody? Battery life. Okay? So now the question becomes, HEVC is great, and it's a smaller footprint on your device, but how much lower battery life will people tolerate to get access to HEVC. And a website called TechSpot ran this comparison where they compared the battery life playing H.264 1080p and HEVC 1080p, and battery life for HEVC was 4.36, and the battery life for H.264 was almost twice that. So a lot of older devices will be able to play HEVC, but they will degrade the battery life by as much as 50%, which is kind of a big deal. Okay, so the bottom line for me, if you're streaming to computers, I think you can save significantly on bandwidth at 720p. 1080p CPU playback may exclude too many older computers. Obviously, this becomes a non-issue if you're streaming adaptively. You know, if you have the ability to create a group of adaptive files that you stream via Dash, then this really doesn't matter because you just, you know, once the playback slows, you'll just send a lower quality file anyway. But if you're encoding a single file only, I would stop at 720p because I think that's where it will play pretty reliably. If you're streaming to mobile, only the most recent generations can play in software, and then you're going to have battery life limits. Hardware support is coming, you know, very soon in a lot of devices. A lot of devices now already have hardware-based decode. And then if you're looking at the OTT market, of course, all those set-top boxes will play back HEVC and hardware, so this really isn't an issue. Any questions about any of this stuff? Okay, what about the ability to create the infrastructure side? The encode side is coming. You know, pretty much there's been live HEVC 4K P60 encode from Elemental, Atem, NEC. A lot of other vendors have it coming. And pretty much all of the premium on-demand vendors are already producing HEVC in their systems, or have announced that they will soon. What are you looking at in terms of encoding time? I ran some tests with a product called, now it's main concept total code. At 720p, it took me about 5 times longer to produce HEVC than H.264, and at 1080p, it was 13 times longer. So it is much more CPU intense. That was on a 48-core HP Z820, so it was a very stout machine. All the other vendors are seeing, they're trying to target the 2 to 4 slower encoding time with HEVC than H.264, or getting live HEVC with 2 to 4 times the CPU requirements as live H.264. So,
how long was the source content?
Pardon?
How long was the source content? So it took 139 to encode the H.264.
I'm sorry, say it again.
How long was the source content? So you're doing a comparison of how long H.264 to H.265. Was the original source content 60 seconds? So that's
Well, the original source content was probably about 90 seconds, but presumably if it was,
so it's about real time on the H.264 side.
yes, faster than, well,
See what I'm saying?
yeah, I do. And I was stuck here because I didn't have any other software encoders that did HEVC. I think, if you looked at the CPU utilization for both H.264 and HEVC, it was pretty poor. So can a software encoder do better? Probably, but there were no others available. So I think this number is probably more relevant. I think from the hardware vendors that are highly optimized, you'll see between a 2 to 4x increase in encoding time, or again, in a live situation, you'll have to throw 2 to 4 times the resources to get a live stream with HEVC as you would with H.264. And then this is a real brief section where I just wanted to, people wondering, gosh, how different is HEVC encode going to look like? Can I do it? Will it be confusing? Is there a learning curve? That's going to vary by vendor. This is the Rovi tool. They give you access to a lot of the low-level HEVC parameters. So you've got a coding tree unit, what it does, when you want to use it, how you want to configure it. You know, they promised to put those type of data in their final documentation, but it wasn't there in what I looked at. So as with H.264, if you want to spend your life experimenting, you know, does this look good on a, you know, on a striped shirt? I mean, what is it? When do you use it? Same thing with the sample adaptive offset, wavefront parallel processing, number of threads. They will give us documentation that says when you use it, how you configure it, but as of now, I don't know. But this is the most you'll see from an HEVC specific configuration. If you look at what Elemental gives you, they let you choose the profile, the level, pretty much the same high-level configuration options you get with H.264, which has always been their approach. They don't want to let you mess up the encode with details you don't know the answers to. Very simple approach, and it works very well because their quality is very, very good. You know, it's been very good for H.264, and it looks good for H.265 as well. And then Harmonic, in their ProMedia Express product, very few HEVC specific parameters. You have data rate, you have, you know, keyframe settings, you have B frames, reference frames, all that same stuff, but very little that's HEVC specific that you've never seen before. When it comes to ProMedia Carbon, they say they'll have more options like we saw with the Rovi total code, but high-level messages, encoding HEVC isn't going to be that hard. You're not going to be presented with a whole lot more encoding parameters than you've used to in the past. Okay, the software side, your questions. DivX 10 came out with HEVC decode in September 2013. Presumably, they are going to pay the royalty. VLC came out with HEVC decode in November of 2013. They are not going to pay the royalty because they're a French company and they don't believe software patents are enforceable in France. So they've had H.264 decode in VLC forever, and MPEG-LA has never gone after them. So the problem with this is that it's not enough to give you ubiquitous decode, right? So if you can't distribute video in HEVC format just because there's two players out there. You want it to be, you know, 85 to 95% of all browsers. And this is, you know, the discussion we kind of started before. Adobe says we'll include HEVC decode in primetime, which is their premium distribution platform, because they can charge customers for it. So if you're a major network and you want to use their services, you can get HEVC decode, but they're not going to put it in the general Flash player. And that's the same decision they did with Dash. Dash is going to be in primetime, but it's not going to be in the Flash player. Apple, haven't heard anything. Do you mind shutting the door? They're selling my book on the table, and I'm looking at all these dollar signs, you know, and it's just so distracting. So Adobe's not going to include HEVC playback in Flash. Apple hasn't said anything about iOS or Mac. Google hasn't said anything about Android or Chrome. And Microsoft hasn't said anything about IE or Windows. So in terms of ubiquitous,
You just mentioned about Google pushing VP9. Have you had any chance to compare VP9 with HEVC?
good question. So how does VP9 compare to HEVC? I've looked for that. Every third-party analysis has really said HEVC is better, but I haven't been able to do my own work. It's only available. There's no encoding tool I've seen that does VP9 yet. That's not command line.
So that means HEVC will win, at least in this case.
Well, yeah. I mean, we'll see. I mean, we'll see. It's interesting because I personally think MPEG-LA shot themselves in the foot with the 25 million maximum because, again, I don't think we're going to see ubiquitous free decode for an Ultra HD codec. So if VP9 can deliver, pick BBC, if they can use VP9 to deliver 20% or lower, 20 to 30% lower bandwidth costs for free, they may decide to do it, because that could be available as a plug-in to any browser tomorrow. But different subject. I mean, I don't think VP9 is going to be a big issue, but if we don't see ubiquitous decode of HEVC soon, maybe it could be. Covered a lot of stuff before. I just don't see it in Flash anytime soon. How many people hate Flash? I mean, so if HEVC was in Flash tomorrow, how many people would say, gosh, I can use it now? Anybody? Okay. I mean, the problem is, if it's not in Flash, it's just not usable. Because if you're waiting for all the browser vendors to support it, Firefox is never going to support it. Opera, I don't know if people care about Opera, but they're never going to support it. And, every browser is going to be different. So you're just, if you can build your own player, maybe Dash will come along and make it easier. But for the next 12 to 24 months, it's just going to be unusable. It's my take. So what I think is going to happen is that, and this is really kind of off the cuff stuff, but if BBC thinks that HEVC is a real money saver, and they know that's the technology that's going to be implemented in set-top boxes and ultimately mobile and computers, maybe they decide to build their own custom players and they pay the royalty. Because if I can save $100 a year in bandwidth, I'd pay 20 cents to do that. So the only way I see it coming out in the shorter term is if the major networks license it themselves and include that in their player. So, you could see Netflix doing that, you could see Hulu doing that, you could see YouTube doing, well, not YouTube, but anybody who's got premium content or subscribers, you could see that happening. And then I think for the rest of us, as I said, HEVC is just going to be unusable. We're just not going to really be able to access it because there's not going to be any kind of ubiquitous player. Anybody have a different opinion?
I'm just trying to understand properly. So the model that you're suggesting whereby CNN license it themselves for what you say will be their own player, doesn't that go against using media source extensions within HTML5? You're saying they would have to write their own player in order to license H.265.
It might, but what do you do? And you can wait until all the browser vendors support it. The one thing is if you're a network like that, you've got to be pretty convinced that 95 to 98% of your potential viewers who want to view it can view it before you implement it. So if that's the case, HTML5 and Dash isn't going to give you a solution until all the browser vendors license. And Mozilla is an $80 million company. So they're never going to license HEVC. They've never licensed H.264. So CNN is saying, or I assume CNN is saying, we can save, if we can cut our bandwidth costs by 30%, that's, pick a number. And so why don't we just create our own player and include HEVC playback in that by whatever means necessary that they want to do it. And then, it's their custom player. And maybe they use media source, maybe they use another technique, but it's their own custom player. They own it. But that's, I think we're 24 months away from a general, we still don't have general purpose H.264 playback via browsers, via HTML5. So, how long is it going to take before H.265 becomes available in that way? And if the bandwidth savings are so potentially compelling, why wouldn't they do that at 20%, 20 cents a player? I mean, that's kind of my thought. Okay, what do we know about producers? This is the streaming media survey we talked about before. How soon do they intend to deploy H.265? You know, these numbers are not, you know, wonderfully statistically significant. It's 269 total respondents. 17% said by the end of 2014, 32% by 2015, but 67% said they don't know. Why do they want to use HEVC? 40%, and this is, you can choose multiple. So 40% said to deliver 4K. 72% said to reduce bandwidth costs. 50% said to deliver HD to mobile. Remember, you know, a higher quality stream over a fixed pipe connection. And 50% said to deliver more content through fixed pipes. So there's a lot of different benefits people are hoping to achieve with HEVC. What types of video will they use? Very few people are doing UHD only installations. So there's some HD only, that was 27%. That was the biggest single category. But the largest category overall were producers who were going to use HEVC with UHD, HD, and SD. What's keeping them from deploying? A lot of different factors. You know, the lack of a player in all three major platforms, the inability to encode, and also the cost. I'm not quite sure what cost they're talking about, but that was one of the. And this is the question I alluded to before. Everybody wants HEVC, but they're 65% said we're only willing to wait twice as long as for H.264. So that's a number that some of the encoding vendors have to get down if they want to satisfy that group of producers. Live VOD or both. You know, most people, when they implement HEVC, want to implement it for both. And you know, those are the most relevant survey questions. So we have about 5 minutes left. I wanted to cover, you know, a lot of this I kind of touched on before, how I see this rolling out. In the OTT space, you know, OTT space, I guess I'm presuming that the big motivating factor is going to be 4K video. To get 4K video, you're going to need a 4K TV, and there's not going to be a lot of 4K TV sets out there for a pretty long time. There's not going to be a lot of units to chase for OTT-specific offerings. There are incompatibilities. Anybody see the article about Panasonic's? So what's interesting about this is that there was no technical explanation that I saw. It wasn't a main versus main 10 issue because the chip that was used in the television set was main 10 compatible. So they basically just said it's not going to work and it's never going to work, but they didn't tell you why. So this is inevitable. This happened with H.264. It happened with MPEG-2. It's going to happen with HEVC. But if I'm buying an HEVC set or UHD set, I'm going to check the decoder specs before I buy. I'm going to make sure it's main 10 compatible. I'm going to make sure it plays Netflix before I buy it. There's also an issue with color space. This is color space recommendations. The specification for UHD sets is actually called Rec 2020, and that specifies 10-bit color. You can see how much more color is in the Rec 2020 as compared to the Rec 709, which is the HD spec. Because the TV vendors wanted to get UHD sets out there quickly, they built them with Rec 709 parts, because those were the only monitors that were available. So sometime over the next 24 to 36 months, there will be a new crop of TV sets that play 10-bit color as opposed to 8-bit color. And as more and more content converts over to that, your set may be obsoleted. If you're decoding in the set, it may be not as good as new sets because you're going to have the old color space. So again, another reason I'm not going to buy a UHD set in the next 2 to 3 years is because I think in 3 years they're probably all going to be Rec 2020 specs. So if I'm going to buy a UHD set today, does it play Netflix? Yes, no. Is it main 10 or main? 8 or 10-bit color? And then the most important thing, or one of the most important things, is it an HDMI connector 2.0? Why is this important? Because even if your HEVC decoder doesn't work, if you can use a set-top box that plays full resolution, full data rate 4K, or 4K 60, then you can get a full UHD experience. But you can't do that on any HDMI connector that's slower than HDMI 2.0. So if it's HDMI 2.0, you can play 4K 60p. If it's not, you can't. So even if this fails you, you can use a set-top box if it's HDMI 2.0 and kind of avoid the problem. And then the other thing that I think is slowing down OTT and UHD is the whole delivery aspect. So Netflix is delivering 4K at 15 megabits per second. This is the average throughput through these systems between October 2003 and January 2013 and January 2014. And here we're seeing 2.5 megabits per second all the way down to 1.5 megabits per second. And that was the whole thing in the United States about net neutrality. And it turns out that Netflix is having to pay these ISPs to get delivery rates for their content up from where they ended up to where they want them to be. So in the States, at least, do we have the ability to deliver 15 megabits per second content over the general internet? And I think the answer is clearly no. That's going to be a country-by-country analysis, but okay, so that's kind of the UHD market. Again, I think general purpose streaming is going to be stagnated by the lack of a general purpose decoder. Some premium services can use PrimeTime, the Adobe platform, or products like that to deliver HEVC, but that's only going to be for the tippy-top brands. Maybe they do that instead of license it themselves. It's probably a more practical solution. But then they're back to, everybody hates Flash, but it turns out that Flash via PrimeTime may be the only way to deliver HEVC in the next 12 to 24 months for general computer playback. And then for general content from my website, because I'm not going to pay for PrimeTime, I can't use HEVC for a long time. Here are the resources if you want information, deeper technical details. And let me just say one more time, this handout and the video files that we referred to are all available on my website. They'll be there for the next, I'm not going to take it down, but over the next few weeks it will come down and it will come down on the home page as I add new articles. Okay, any questions?
I just wanted to say, I think you had not a lot on mobile, but on mobile HEVC is getting much more prominent. So like Encoding is launching a set of devices where they have 5 to 6 devices, all HEVC capable. There's a lot of support in mobile devices for HEVC decoding and even encoding. So I think that there will be a huge pickup of HEVC in the mobile space, which seems not have to be captured fully here.
Which seems what?
It's not fully captured, so it's something which you have more like it's coming on the long term. But there's hardware support for decoding. There is.
It's all new. It's all new stuff, though. It's all. So the installed base of anything that's new is going to be small.
Well, the turnaround of mobile phones is so quick that basically that's going to happen. By the end of the year, you will see HEVC services because the devices are shipped. So I think that mobile is really where HEVC is going to pick up first, because you have this fast turnaround of phones and so on.
Also, the bandwidth constraints
well. So I think that's the great opportunity. I think that should be that's what we see.
When you say opportunity, I mean, does that mean you have the opportunity to create new markets or just save money sending video to?
Both, we expect. You get new experiences. We see all the LTE broadcasts, for example. All the idea of launching LTE broadcasts with HEVC, at the same time streaming and also encoding on the phones is going to be HEVC based. So and operators are really pushing for having this in their devices because it's giving them now savings and new services.
What's the maximum percentage anybody has seen mobile playback as compared to computer playback for video?
I think the stats we were showing from the BBC yesterday.
Say it again?
The BBC stats which we were showing yesterday was more than 50%, I think, for mobile.
Wow.
Definitely they'd overtake. You can buy an iPad, tablet and phone, it's higher than PC.
Okay. So that could be very, very important in the short term.
The whole is still Apple, right?
Say it again?
Apple is still the whole in the HEVC commitment.
This thing is.
Apple necessarily is putting.
Say it again?
So I think that the gap is what Apple's going to do with HEVC because they've not been forthcoming in what the codec support is. I think even last year H.264 was still could get a lot out of that. So obviously they won't commit to what they're doing.
Well, I think that's what it's going to take. If Apple gets locked out of a lot of the premium services that he's describing, then that's what it'll take to motivate them to move forward. But the flip side to your comment is that there's a lot of people who are very, very committed to Apple. I mean, would I buy an Android phone because it did HEVC? I mean, I don't think so. But you make a great point. I mean, I think that's, mobile may be one of the quicker pickup areas, and it is a very much increasing percentage of the overall share of video playback.
It's just hard to get the HEVC encoding guys to move faster than they have because they've invested a lot of time and money in developing the codecs, but there's not been a lot of business. So I talked to a lot of the codec guys and they've done wonderful things, but if they can't commercialize it, people won't pay a lot, frankly, because they want to pay the same thing for an encoder, which is, I do everything for free with H.264, so why do I have to pay for an encoder? So that's part of the problem is that the decode side, I think, is coming. I think the encoding side is the harder part of the problem.
Well,
Actually, I don't think so, because I'm working for, our company provides an IPTV service, and when we reduce the use bandwidth by 50%, we have a much more range. We can reach more people. We widen our market, and we are currently evaluating HEVC encoders, and we have a lot of money because that brings new opportunities.
who are you evaluating?
Pardon?
Which companies are you evaluating?
A1 Telecom Austria.
Which vendors for encode are you looking
I
at?
think we checked a theme,
Attempt. Elemental? Elemental?
No, I don't think elemental. Think about what harmonic,
Harmonic?
and at least a third one.
Okay, well, Elemental says they're making not big money, but they're starting to make significant revenue from HEVC. So, I think there are some vendors who really haven't launched their products in a big way yet, but I think there's some that are really pursuing it hotly. So have you started using HEVC or you're looking at it?
No, we are currently evaluating it because we're using a set-top box, and we have to find a new set-top box which has a hardware chip in it, and then we have to exchange all the boxes for all our customers. So we have to.
So when is that planned?
I'm not sure if it's actually planned. Maybe next year or later.
Okay.
What's your view then on prime time? So they're including that in terms of what they're pushing, the pay-per-user model. For us as a free-to-air broadcaster, going from a free flash player to prime time play as you play, it's quite a hard jump for us. So I think I've never heard the point of them pushing HEVC in prime time, but
I think it's a great strategy on their part. Are you advertising supported, or there's no monetization?
Advertising supported, yeah.
Isn't it kind of the same thing? I mean, you're getting your money. I mean, if you can save bandwidth by using HEVC, I mean, you don't need to be subscription to make money from your video. So that's the way they're going. And again, the 25 million number, I don't think we're going to see free decode anywhere. Ubiquitous decode that's easily reachable.
I have a question about the 10-bit color profile. Do you know if I use the 10-bit color profile in HEVC, will it allow me to reduce the bandwidth even more to get the same compression quality?
If you use the 8-bit profile?
The 10-bit, the 10
Well,
color.
I haven't done that side-by-side test. I don't know what the answer is. I would presume, I don't know. That's a great question. So I don't know the answer to that. Does anybody? Do you?
No, I would have another question. Just on the incompatibilities for this, for example, the Panasonic. So what we know is that, for example, it's not the decoding compatibility. A lot of the aspects have to do with the security framework, which needs to be improved to deliver UHD. So did you check if this would be the reason for example, the Panasonic not being able to decode? Because the security requirements for UHD content are heavy, and that's where typically the problems start. Right? It's not the decoding, it's the security framework.
Okay. Do you know that, or are you assuming
Well,
that?
I'm just assuming this, heard also from other discussions.
Okay.
That could be I just was wondering if you
Yeah.
checked if this is the reason.
I mean, I saw the article, and I did make sure, I did track the chip and make sure it was maintained, so it wasn't that. I knew it wasn't that, but the article said no reason had been given. And it could be security. I just wanted to know if we knew for sure. Okay, thanks for coming.